You're listening to Three Kitchens Podcast, hosted by home cooks Erin Walker and Heather Dyer.
We're on a mission to inspire you to try something new. Let's all learn to cook better and eat great food.
Well, hello and welcome to Three Kitchens Podcast. My name is Erin Walker, and here joining me is my co-host Heather Dyer. Hello, Heather.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm well. Well enough.
Well enough for a Monday morning.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, today we also have Nancy May joining us from the Family Tree Food and Stories podcast and book. Nancy and her friend Silvia have co-created a book and have a companion podcast called Family Tree Food Stories, and so she's joining us today to tell us all about it. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I've been listening to your podcast and it's great. I love it.
Thank you. We've been enjoying yours too.
Right back at you.
Yeah.
Pod pals.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we all seem to have a few things in common.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you tell us a bit about the book and the podcast, what it's all about?
Sure. Well, let me start with the podcast and I'll go to the book. The podcast is all about how to look at the food and the family relationships and the traditions that we have and the history of food and gathering. It's the one thing that we will travel hill and dale across country, get on planes and go, and travel for long distances to do. It's to eat. Yes, we'll see family too. But, one of the things is the adventure of the food and the stories and everything around it. And the generations that have really brought those stories together in such a way that is so rich. That could be as simple as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich all the way on to a coq au vin, whatever it might be. I don't do that. And the book is called My Family Tree Food and Stories. And what Silvia Lovely, my co-author and co-host in the podcast, have done is collected stories from many different people. And there's tiny little stories that give you an example of what you can do to capture those really wonderful, memorable moments, whether they be good or sad or quirky and funny, and turn them into connections into the recipes that have made your life so rich. And it's a journal. So you can create your own stories, you can add your own recipes. There's a way to trace your family history in the back as it relates to, well, here's mom's apple pie and great grandma's soup, all the way down to maybe what you did in grammar school with your own recipes as a kid. So that's what we do.
I think it's very cool because a lot of us, I think, are always, oh, look, there's the book. A lot of us look for ways to not just compile recipes that we like to make. You hear people all the time, what are you using? Are you doing the Pinterest board? Do you have a recipe box? Do you have a journal? What are you doing to record and store those recipes? But particularly when it's something that's handed down, maybe you don't have it written somewhere, it's not on your computer. How do you bring those things together in a way that you can cook from and enjoy and share?
Mm-hmm. And we tend not to do that. You put those stories together in your head and occasionally you bring them out, but they are so rich with color and life, to the point that, quite frankly, food and those stories really add to who we are as families and individuals. They make us strong, they make us real, and they give us a point of connection that is so endearing, whether it be, around your own kitchen table, or my dad would always bring salesmen to our home to sit and have dinner with us, or they'd go out and they'd have a meal together. But he always brought them to the family table too. And I think that's so important. And the rich cultural heritage of our foods shape our character.
And he obviously felt very proud of what was served at the table in his home, right? If he was feeling like he could bring people in and enjoy food with your family, he must have been like, he probably said to them, like, you got to eat at my house. Like,
My dad was not an adventurous eater anyway. It was, everything was baked, boiled, and broiled. And that was kind of, it was simple basics, but it was good. It was good food. Adding wine was making it fancy.
that's a real thing. I feel more fancy if I cook with wine.
I'd feel fancy if I drank with the wine too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that there's such a strong connection around a dinner table and eating and sharing that meal with somebody. And we've brought this up many times with other guests that it's something that easily gets lost, especially now where people don't feel comfortable cooking anymore. People are too busy to sit down and share that meal. And so, because it's not something we do every day, it makes it so much more special and important now when we do. And I think that's something that we love highlighting, and we love hearing these stories. I hope it motivates people to be like, oh, I need to sit down and share a meal with my family this week, at least once, right? And just kind of hopefully push them to do that, and to think about what they're cooking and have intention and purpose in it. And
It's a recap of the day, right? How did your
Mhm.
day go? It's a way to connect. At least that's what it was when we were growing up. How was your day at school? What happened? What didn't happen? What happened at the office? My dad would talk about things. My sister would talk about things. Mom would share, and the dogs even got in on the act. So, but we forget about those things, and quite frankly, I believe we're looking for a little bit more personal connection that we've had in the past. We've gone through the generation of everything is about speed, moving so fast. You've got to connect on your phone. Now we're into the loneliness epidemic where people don't know how to
Mm.
connect with one another. And the easiest thing to do is to really just sit down at a table and I wouldn't say force yourself to talk, but when there's just food on the plate and there's nothing else, there's no other sound, sooner or later somebody's going to say, so, and break the silence, right?
Mhm.
Or I had to think of how many deals I've done over a lunch or breakfast table in business, and how many deals have not happened, or connections that happened with some very powerful people, all because the two of us got enthusiastic talking about our families and who they are and what we stood for and the meals that we shared. But I do believe that having the ability to relax and be comfortable at a table enables you to really connect with someone on a very human and personal level. So it's just amazing how powerful
Mm.
food can really be. And those stories, if you are so committed, shows through of your engagement. It shows you who you are as a person.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you're having trouble breaking the ice or, starting a conversation, you can always talk about the food you're sharing, right?
Right.
Everybody likes to talk about food, whether it's because they love it or because they're not crazy about it.
It's like it sparks something when that
Absolutely.
when that
Yeah.
food shows up. It sparks that conversation and that connection. And
Or you can even start a conversation with, so what was your favorite meal when you were a kid?
mm,
It doesn't matter whether you're at a fancy fresh French restaurant or, just at a burger joint. Just to know, what somebody liked and enjoyed when they were a child starts that conversation of, oh, you had Wonder Bread too? So in the course of your family, is there something that a memory around a food or food related item or experience that you have now brought into the tradition of your own family from when you were a child to where you are today? Is there something that you either do around the holidays or for special occasions? But is there something that evokes just such a sense of nostalgia that you had to continue that tradition with your own kids?
I don't know if there's anything specific that we make. I'm the type of person that's got china from a lot of different family members,
I
and
do
so
too. I
we
love it.
we eat off of it all the time. It's not something that only comes out for a special occasion. And so, we'll talk about family through the dinnerware that we have, or the glasses that we're using and where they came from and the person associated with it. I don't know if we have a ton of meals, but we do talk about family a lot when we sit around the table, just because we're always using, the
A
dishes
part of the history
from them.
is on your plate all the time, right? I
Hmm.
think that's
Hmm.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was showing Erin my coffee cup I've got this morning.
Yes.
My great grandparents are on this.
Are you really? Seriously?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. See?
Oh my God, that's
There they are.
fabulous. I
My
love
mom had
that.
printed this. That's got their names on there, and that's
That is so cool.
my maternal great grandparents. So I pull that out every once in a while, and it's kind of fun that they're on there. And I have my parents' wedding china as well, but we don't pull it out as often because I don't have anywhere to put it. This is the thing about maybe our generation. We don't have the china cabinets. Like
Yeah.
my sister took the china cabinet. I have the china. She has her
That
own
seems
stuff. She puts in
Well,
disconnected.
that's convenient.
it doesn't go in my house. It doesn't. The china cabinet would, I didn't have a place for it and it would look completely out of place here. So I actually have all the china packed in like a Rubbermaid because I don't have room for it in my cupboards. That's part of the problem with trying to use that stuff on a daily basis, right? It's like, where do you
Right.
put it? Where do you keep it?
No, I would agree. Well, I'll share one story that might be interesting, and it'll explain to people who are listening just how simple it is to really look at the food and the history and the traditions that you have. So, as a kid growing up, I would go get the Christmas tree with my dad. My sister did it sometimes, but it was always sort of like dad and Nance, it was our thing. And as we got older and we moved from Long Island, where I grew up, to Massachusetts, one of the things my dad wanted to do was go out and get fresh tree. It became this tradition. We'd go get the tree and we'd always find a place to have hot chocolate. So the Christmas tree and hot chocolate became our kind of special moment together, whether it was a tree in a field that we thought you could cut it down and somebody had a saw on the edge and charged you $10 for it. We thought that was legal, but somebody else was managing it. But so that's okay. They had the saws, they got paid. We just did it.
Cash only.
But it was
No
always
trace.
cold and like lugging that thing over hill and dale and sometimes through some wet areas. It was the hot chocolate that I remembered. So it can be as simple as a hot chocolate memory. I think it's kind of fun to see that people you don't have to cook in order to have some sort of emotional connection to those stories and those memories of what happened when you were a kid or what did you share with somebody.
Yeah. Well, we tell
Absolutely.
stories, like our family, we tell stories all the time about food we've eaten when we've been traveling or away somewhere or went out to eat together because it's not something we do all the time. So my kids like to reminisce now that they're old enough to have some of those core memories. When you're real little, you don't necessarily remember stuff.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you have all these memories about this experience and you kind of keep the feeling of that experience alive because you're talking about it. And often it's the food is the trigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. What sparked you and friend Sylvia to embark on compiling all these stories into a book and creating a podcast through it? How did you guys land on this is what we want to do?
Well, we were actually introduced by another podcaster, a friend of ours, mutual friend, Leo York, who has a podcast called The 13th Floor. Nothing to do with food, but and then we just started talking and I said, I'm really interested in the idea of family heritage and genealogy and then how to tie that into food and stories. And she says, I am too. And so we got into this conversation and looked at what was going on. Maybe there's a pairing that should take place.
Absolutely.
That's kind of how we started to evolve. And she's a storyteller. She teaches storytelling as well in Lexington.
Everything aligned.
Yeah, and we've never met in person, interestingly enough.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
It's a virtual friendship that has evolved, and it feels like it's a natural fit. It really is wonderful to see what can happen over the airwaves, right?
We were introduced to you through a mutual podcast, another podcaster as well, Paige. We know her virtually, and she introduced us. So yeah, that's, such a great community of people supporting each other and our creative pursuits.
Yeah, the podcast community is really incredibly special and personal.
I can guarantee that you'll want to stick around for just a moment to hear the rest of this story. But before we take you there, Sylvia and I want to share news about our newest book called My Family Tree Food and Stories. We've created this one just for you and your family and friends. It's designed as a type of journal where you can relive and share your family recipes and stories. Honestly, most people think of a plate of food as just that, food. But when paired with a good story, each bite becomes a banquet of joy, laughter, maybe even a few tears, and memories that never go stale. To get more details, go to podcast.familytreefoodstories.com/contact. We've got a lot more fun and a lot more to come down the road, or just to put on your plate. But for now, let's get back to the rest of this story.
So, should we jump into the recipe that you shared with us?
Sure, I'd love to do that.
Well, I will pass it over to Heather then because she was the creator
Well, I made it
on our team.
on our team. Yeah. But Nancy, why did you choose this recipe to share? Can you tell us something about it and why it's special?
Sure. I call this Mom's Special Chicken or Birthday Chicken. And it was a recipe that my mom had made time and time again. And it was my favorite. It's a very personal kind of recipe. And it was an easy one to do. It's one that I've shared with friends and family members. You know, I could do it in my sleep, literally. It's so easy to do, and it's special. Every time it was my birthday, Mom would say, "What do you want for your, what do you want for your birthday?" Mom's Special Chicken. That was it. And every time I've made it for friends, they think it's the most amazing meal they've had. They think it's gourmet and it's special. And yes, every time it comes out just a little different because I do something different with it. So it's forgiving and it's good. So Mom's Special Chicken.
Is it a recipe that you asked your mom for, or was it something that you made with her, or is it something that you've just kind of put together out of memory, or how did the recipe get passed on to you?
My mom followed recipes.
Okay.
My mom found recipes and she used them, and then if she liked it, she'd do it again and again, and she wouldn't have to look at a recipe again. But one of her favorite books, and I think it came out of this one, was Make It Now, Bake It Later. And there's a whole series of these books. And I remember going to a store where we had moved to in Massachusetts. It was in Marion, Massachusetts, and they had this whole it was a gift shop, and they had a whole display of these series of these Make It Now, Bake It Later books. I even have a couple of those that she gave me, and her handwriting is in it. And every time I see the handwriting, it's like, a little bit of mom is right there with me too. But it was a simple meal. It was very easy to do. And so it was her recipe that she got someplace else. And it just became sort of a staple on special occasions. And growing up, steak was sort of, beef was the meat of the day that was more cost effective, and chicken was expensive. So chicken was a special meal. And then I asked her, it's like, how do you make that, Mom? And I would watch her. So yeah.
Interesting how times change, hey?
Right?
What's the expensive cut of meat now?
That is a really interesting thought, how that's changed. Huh.
And fish was inexpensive then too. So
now nothing's inexpensive, but
no, right?
So this Mom's Special Chicken recipe is a baked chicken.
You flour it. What I do is I just take a plastic bag. You throw flour in it, right? And with a little salt and pepper, any kind of other spice. If you want a little garlic in there, you can throw a little garlic powder in there too. But you throw the chicken in there. And I've always found that you're better off using chicken breasts that have the bone in it. It works good with the dark meat too, but I think it works better with a nice, real meaty chicken breast versus just a deboned chicken. It just doesn't seem to have the same kind of flavor. But you get nice and floury, and then you brown it in a skillet. Make sure it's nice and crusty and it's got a good color to it on both sides. And then you stick it in a baking pan, depending upon how many people you're serving. So if it's 4 people, 4 chicken breasts, go that way. And then you take apricot jelly or apricot jam, and you put it in a mixing bowl, and you fill that jar up with about 3/4 of the way with white wine. Take the white wine, put it in with the jam, and you mix it till it's melted. Once that's done, you pour that over your chicken, and that's in the baking crock. and then sprinkle it with pinoli nuts if you don't have those. Pecans work a little bit better than walnuts because the walnuts don't are a little drier flavor and the pecans are a little sweeter flavor to them. And you don't have to use nuts either, but it just adds a little extra texture. And then you bake it in the oven like 325, 345 for about 45 minutes till they're done. And voila, that's it.
Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um,
If you want to make it look pretty, you can add a little parsley too.
oh, okay. Well, first of all, I had to look up what those pignoli nuts are because I'd never heard of that. And so I
Oh,
Googled it, and another name is pine nuts. So
yes.
there you go. That was familiar to me. I was like, oh, it's pine nuts. I had no idea. And then what size of jar of preserves do you typically use?
Well, it depends upon how much chicken you have, right? I'm not a grandmother, but there's a grandmother in me saying, well, it depends,
Yeah.
right?
And there's
Well,
the,
right. I would say it's like I think it's like 10 ounces, right? Depending upon how much meat you have in. You can do a larger jar, but I would say, at least a cup and a half of preserves. You can also
okay.
substitute the preserves, the apricot preserves for orange marmalade if you want. But
Oh,
the apricot gives it a nicer flavor, I think.
I like
It's
the
just a different
apricot
flavor. So
actually.
you can
Yeah.
use one or the other.
Yeah, because I had some questions because there weren't really measurements in the recipe, but that just goes to show your sort of experience, not only with this recipe, but with kind of your comfort level in the kitchen. As you
Hmm.
talk about kind of winging it and doing a little of this and a little of that, I could tell when you're talking that you're not the person who's going to say, how many pieces of chicken and how much jam? I did feel
Ah,
like I ended up with more liquid than I was imagining there was going to be.
actually, it is kind of liquidy afterwards.
Okay, okay.
So there's a lot of liquid in there. And what's nice about that is put it over rice and it just like the rice soaks it up. So it's really got a nice sort of sweet flavor to it.
I had made egg noodles. So we had some homemade egg noodles with our special chicken, and it was really delicious. I like the sweetness of this recipe.
Right. And it's not too
Hmm.
sweet.
Yeah, it was something I don't typically like. Usually, when I'm making chicken, I tend to go a bit more of the savory, spicy.
Mhm.
So it was a nice change. I don't know. What did you think of it, Erin? We haven't discussed it.
We haven't discussed it yet. We
Oh,
try and save it for in the moment. I loved this day that Heather came by because she had made me an entire serving for my family, plus
Oh,
egg noodles. And I was halfway through, I had just started kind of putting together dinner that night. Can't remember what I was making, but it was a cold, hard stop. Moved everything that I was cooking into somewhere else and popped it in the fridge and said, nope, change of plans. We're having this. So I think I just boiled up some like frozen vegetables quickly for the
mhm.
side, and we had dinner like that. And because my kids love to always ask, what's for dinner tonight? And I had told them one thing, and they came to the table and they were like, this is
what's
not
this?
what you
Yeah.
had described earlier. I said, no,
Surprise!
change of
It's mom's
plans.
surprise chicken.
It was
Yeah,
mom's
it's true.
surprise chicken. But they thought it was great. I liked the apricot flavor a lot in
Hmm.
this.
As we're talking, I'm thinking if you want a little bit more savory, I would experiment and just, do the same recipe and throw a couple of slices of lemon on top of it while it's cooking, which would probably take a little bit
Ooh.
of the sweetness, but also give it a little bit of a sort of a zing without making it sour, which would be
Hmm.
kind of nice too.
Mm.
Just
Yeah,
sort of an
that would be
idea.
good. You could
Yeah.
also add more seasoning or like herbs to the chicken when you brown it. So that crust
Absolutely.
on the chicken is a little more
Yeah.
seasoned. And then, like you said, adding to the flour or however you like to do that.
And it's a fabulous leftovers. Oh my God, it tastes so much better. I mean, it's
Mm.
good the day of, but it's really, because the sauce kind of congeals as you would expect a
Hmm.
jelly or a jam to do.
I would
Yeah.
I would love to have this with fresh apricots too. Grill them up or fry them up in the pan too and have
Oh
them
yeah.
in there with the chicken just to add that
Ooh.
like, oh, I love those stone fruits. And when you can cook with them
Mhm.
and add them into these savory dishes, oh, that's just
Really good. Yeah.
so
Hmm.
Yeah.
good. So I can see busting this out again once we get some of those summer fruits back again, because Heather's made a chicken with a peach that was pickled
Ooh.
prior too. Yeah,
Mm.
I've made these pickled peaches with pineapple as well. Like, and now I'm thinking maybe apricots have to go in the mix too, because
I've never heard of pickled peaches
It's a
before.
Southern American thing, apparently.
Well, I'm down in Florida now, and
Okay, you need to make it. You can pickle
yeah,
just about anything.
that's what we're learning is everything could be pickled and these sweet flavors that you add into this savory stuff. Ooh,
Mm,
tomato jam, which was really
mm.
it was sweet. It was like a regular jelly type of jam. It was very, very good. That was surprising too.
oh, that sounds
It
fantastic.
was good.
I
Yeah,
like taking things out of their traditional role or where you experience them normally, like the crossing that sweet and savory boundary.
I agree. Yeah,
Hmm.
very, very good. And you can even add some rosemary probably to that
Mm.
mom's special chicken to give that extra little zip to it
Oh,
as well, because chicken is
yeah.
always good with rosemary, right? So I would
Always.
do that. Have some fun
Yeah.
with it. It's a very forgiving recipe. I mean, I don't think you can go wrong with it.
Hmm. And I like in the write-up you mentioned that picky kids and maybe some seniors, this really appeals to those groups too, because picky kids like sweet, and as you get older, you like sweet things too, which I thought was an interesting note. I didn't
Yeah.
know that about our taste, like our taste buds, that sweetness is one of the last things to
Right.
fade away, I guess.
Yeah, my
I just
dad had sort of lost. He was sort of a picky eater, and wasn't a big eater, but he was a big guy. He played football in college, and at one point, I remember the aides calling me and saying, you know, your dad doesn't want to eat anything. He's really not that interested. And I thought, geez, you know, what am I going to do? I could have come, and I said, he loves honey. Why don't you pour some honey on the fried chicken and see what
Mm.
happens? Well, somebody poured some honey on the fried chicken, and he ate it like it was candy. He just like didn't stop. So that was it. That was just surprise, surprise. A little honey goes a long way.
Hmm.
Huh.
Yeah, that's,
Very
well, it's
interesting.
interesting, right? Like, well, I like this recipe, and I think you could make it any which way you like.
Hmm.
And I would think if you didn't have wine or you're not a fan of it, you could probably use chicken broth
Oh,
or,
I would
you
imagine.
know,
Yeah.
this has been really fun. And I love this idea of documenting stories and not necessarily it needing to be a recipe. You know, because I did have it in my mind that I would be like, oh, what recipes would I write here in this book? Well, it doesn't need to be a recipe. It could just be a food memory or it could be a meal memory.
Hmm.
Exactly. It's going to be
Yeah.
very, very simple. I mean,
Well, can you tell all of our listeners how they get their hands on your book and where to find your podcast?
sure. The podcast is at podcast familytreefoodstories.com. It's familytreefoodstories.com, podcast first dot. And the book is called My Family Tree Food and Stories. Let me see. It's on
Nice.
Amazon and it looks kind of like this. There's a picture of a tree on the front and a book and a family under the tree. It looks like a tree of life with fruit and vegetables on it. And it's My Family Tree Food and Stories, your personal journal of favorite and memorable foods, recipes, and stories to remember and share. And it's written by Silvia Lovely and myself, Nancy May. And we actually add with your family and friends because you're the ones who are actually authoring it. But we have a whole lot of
Mhm.
hints and tips on how to do things. And it's beautifully illustrated. It's 272 pages, including notes and stories, and lots of room to have fun and make every meal a memory and every story is a feast. So that's kind of our slogan.
That's really nice. And we, of course, will link to the podcast and the where to buy the book on the show notes. So, listener, go ahead and scroll down and find that. And we encourage everybody to go and follow along and listen to the stories. We're really enjoying listening to your podcast and hearing these lovely little memories and the recipes too. But it's really about the memory and the story that people share with their recipe.
Hmm.
Food is so rich in our minds in so many ways, and you know, it fills our bellies and we enjoy the taste, but it really is, it's the stories and the memories that are left behind afterwards, right?
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been great. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to get you to know you both, and I'm glad you liked the recipe as well, and hopefully you'll share it with others.
We will. We'll put that on our website as well. We have a little
Absolutely.
recipe blog there. Okay, awesome. So anyone who'd like to make that, you know where to find it, threekitchenspodcast.com.
And it can be your birthday chicken recipe too.
And now for the fine print. Links to recipes and other things we talked about in this episode can be found on the show notes or our website, www.threekitchenspodcast.com. Come say hello on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, YouTube, and TikTok. We'd love to connect. And if you enjoy the show, pass it on. Word of mouth is the number 1 way people learn about new podcasts. Thanks for listening. I'm hoping I'm on my game. I don't feel completely.
Hey, there's 3 of us. Between the 3 of us, it's going to be